Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. It's Tuesday, March 24th when we record this, and we have our mayor, Salisbury Mayor Jake Day, in the house today. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Greg.
So, a lot going on in our community
Yeah.
with this coronavirus situation, and I wanted to have you on to update us all where things stand. And I also want to talk about this meeting that I got to watch that you had yesterday, and I was actually blown away by this thing because you had on town officials from across the shore in this webcast thing, and you all were sharing your problems and coming up with solutions, and that was something that I would never even think to do.
Well, I'm born and raised Salisbury, and for me that means I hail not only from the state of Maryland, but from the state of Delmarva. And I think a lot of people share that mindset. That mindset is, of course, that we love our state, whether that's Delaware, Maryland, or Virginia. But Delmarva is a cultural mindset that we all belong to. And we share a lot in common with folks from Lewis or Smyrna or Chestertown or Onancock in Salisbury or Fruitland or Delmar. So there's a lot that unites us. And my feeling was, and the reason why I asked people to participate in that call was we can share some of our good ideas, some of the things that each of us are doing, and be better and stronger for it. And this is also on the heels of the Salisbury area coronavirus recovery task force meeting a week prior, where we collected our business community as well as elected officials and institutional leaders together. But I felt the Delmarva-wide conversation would give us an opportunity to share some of our best practices and some of the things that are getting us through in different sectors of our community in this moment. And what I learned was there are great ideas being implemented in Milford and in Lewis and in Snow Hill and in Chestertown and in Oxford, and things that we can share with each other. And so that sort of camaraderie doesn't need to just happen at the U.S. Conference of Mayors or the Maryland Municipal League or MACo level. It can happen right here on Delmarva.
Well, and showing that leadership too. The chamber thing that you're talking about from last week, it was Sperry Van Ness. It was businesses came in, and there were a lot of solutions, but there was a lot of cheerleading that went on, and just so that people knew the government cared about what was going on, was going to try to help navigate people through this and to offer some solutions for things. It was really valuable.
Well, and not just cheerleading from government, but cheerleading from the private sector as well. Clearly, the Greater Salisbury Committee and the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce, the Fruitland Chamber of Commerce, and the East County Chamber of Commerce. A lot of people don't remember that we have two other small chambers in our area that represent the small businesses on the east side of Wicomico County and in the Fruitland area, and that collaborate on a regular basis with Salisbury. We forget that. Those institutions have a leadership role to play here too. And I think they expressed that in that call that, hey, we are prepared to make tough decisions. We're going to hurt through this, but we're going to be stronger if we plan now, if we execute now. And that's why we didn't wait a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to start trying to recover. There are great public health officials in Dr. Steve Leonard and his team at PRMC and in Lori Brewster at the Wicomico and Somerset County Health Departments, and throughout the region in public health. And clearly what they're going to do is be the experts who tell us what we need to do to get through this in a safe and health manner. But then it's incumbent upon us to take on this notion of recovery and economic and social recovery and get after it right now. There is no time to waste.
I also see what the governor has done in terms of introducing restrictions, like slowly, like one at a time, but it gets us prepared for these things that are going to happen. So like over the weekend, Governor Carney in Delaware made a decision about closing some things, beaches and stuff, businesses. They were going to implement their stuff today. And I said, well, then on Monday, Governor Hogan's going to do the same thing. So you sort of get a sense of where things are headed in all this. And even last week, when you first got out there with your first news release announcing what the city was going to do, my first thought was, gosh, maybe they're overreacting. And this is like on Wednesday. But by Friday, I was like, thank goodness they were overreacted.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've continued to hear from the public health experts at a national level is if you think you're overreacting, you're probably right in the right space. That your porridge is just right. So that's where you where you want to live. You want to go a step beyond what's comfortable, because what it's going to do is ultimately save lives. And I think most importantly, and we cannot forget this, that when we act decisively, when we act quickly, and when we act a little faster than we might think is absolutely necessary, chances are we're making this crisis end faster. And so let's be decisive. Let's get in front of this thing. I think that's what Governor Hogan has tried to do from the start. That's what we've tried to do. We've also tried very hard not to get ahead of him. The County Director of Administration, Wayne Strasburg, and I are in constant communication multiple times a day in each other's offices, texts, phone calls, just trying to be in lockstep with one another. And it's been easy. It's been fantastic so far, that relationship and that partnership. And what it's meant is that we'll have conversations about, do we implement this restriction or that restriction, which maybe is further than the governor's comfortable going. And we'll back off a little bit and try to find the right space that protects our citizens, because we've got an obligation to do that. That's not something reserved only at the federal and state level. We have the same obligation. But also, do we need to make sure that we're listening to those statewide public health officials, recognizing that we're in a place where those critical employees are commuting in from other states, from other jurisdictions. So when we implement controls that aren't in place in another city or another county or another state, we're likely to run into a position, I think, of creating confusion for people. And this is a time where we don't want to confuse anybody. We want to be as clear as possible. We want to communicate as well as we can. And frankly, that's another reason why I'm appreciative of being here. Telecommunications are considered a critical function in every state in the union right now. So this is important. That messaging is important, and that lockstep nature of decision making is important.
So you guys get out there on that Wednesday and you're very proactive. And by Friday, the county sort of caught up with you guys, I think. And I think you showed that leadership. This is how we get information out. And on Friday, they were getting the information out. We found out we had the first 2 patients in Wicomico County right away, that it was here. And that woke a lot of people up to hear that. Now, you joined that news conference in progress. You actually got called away on deployment right in the middle of all this.
Not a deployment,
Okay.
but I was in Laurel, Maryland for an Army-related matter, and then I was going to Annapolis to do something with Mayor Gavin Buckley in Annapolis, and I had to cancel on the mayor of Annapolis. Please forgive me, Mayor Gavin. We're going to reschedule, but. We had a meeting set up, and we had to cancel that in order to get home. But that was an important conversation, that moment where you saw county and city officials. You also saw law enforcement, you saw fire and EMS, and you saw health department officials, public health officials. When we stand together like that, I think we send the best possible message, which is that we are united, we are unified, we are working in the public's best interest, and that's what's already happening behind the scenes. So to move that to in front of the cameras, I think is an important trust-building measure.
Yeah, and I think it was crucial in terms of the communication, and I think it was driven by the city that you all were there, and it was more than just a show. It was, okay, our leadership is together on this thing. They recognize there's a problem, and they want to deal with it.
Well, and here's the other thing I'll tell you about Lori Brewster and her leadership of the health department is, they may like to put their head down and do their job and be the health professionals that are solving the problem, but she knows the level of import saying, we have our first case in Wicomico County had. And so she called that press conference saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a press conference. We're going to stand up in front of the cameras and we're going to say, here's what's happening. I think the recognition there is that public transparency communication is critical, and we're not going to let people find this out another way. It did not, at least as I could tell, it did not get out any other way. I didn't hear about it through the press first. I didn't get asked about it through Facebook messages, which is normally what happens. Long before the governor's message ever went out, people were asking me, is this what the governor's going to do? Is that what the governor's going to do? This was a piece of information that she knew she had to stand up and release, and I commend her for that.
But people want to know how this thing's growing, I think.
Yeah, people want to know.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is, at some point, it no longer makes sense to hold a press conference every time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think she's right to decisively say we're stepping down to this level of communication on these issues. That doesn't that doesn't end the immediacy of needing to get the information out. So as long as they're consistent, I'm sure they will be, of updating that website. That's important, and I think it should be done. So I'm glad to hear that that's the way it's going to be handled. But I don't think a daily press conference would make a lot of sense moving forward. Excuse me, I don't think a press conference at each new case would make sense. Regarding daily press conferences, you've probably seen that we've shifted to a 5 p.m. live Facebook briefing. The thinking there, and we've done 4 of those, maybe 3 or 4 of those, is just people need to know what's going on.
They need to know.
And it does change from minute to minute.
Yeah.
So a daily wrap-up is actually a process of the first 1 or 2. I printed out a bunch of information, notes to have access to. Now it's just kind of stream of consciousness and answering questions. It's, there's so much that changes every minute. We just need to get all that out there. So I'm doing my best just to give people what I know and to answer questions as I can. There will be things I don't know how to answer. There will be questions that people don't like the answer. There have been lots of people that ask me, why isn't this closed yet? Or can you close that? And some people don't like the answer, no. But certain functions are critical to the continuity of life, like the production of food and the sale of food. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. It hasn't stopped in California or New York or any other state in the union, and it's not going to stop now. So I would say, be advised that certain functions need to continue, and it's incumbent then upon those businesses to protect their workers, protect their consumers, so that things aren't transmitted on their products, and then to protect individuals and family that their workers might come in contact with. So we recognize all that's important, and we want to do our best to help them, but you're not going to see 100% shutdown. We are not a central government like China that can do that, and you're not likely to see it even if we could.
I thought of your training this morning because Senator Chris Coons from Delaware was on one of the cable news shows this morning. And he said that when he was a county executive in Newcastle County, he had to work closely with National Guard people whenever there was a snow emergency. Mm-hmm. So he learned their processes for handling emergencies, the way they think to deal in a crisis. And I was like, my gosh, our mayor has that same training.
Look, I've shared this message with our staff and with the city council, that a crisis exposes a team's strength or a team's weaknesses. I believe this is our time to shine. This is our time to work harder than we have ever worked, step into the fold, and decisively move forward toward resolution of each aspect of this crisis: the public safety, the public health, and the economic impacts, and the individual economic impacts of this crisis. It is all too easy at a time like this to say, we're stuck at home. We're going to let off the gas. We're going to relax. We're going to do the bare minimum we have to do to maintain basic functions and survive. Not going to happen under my watch. This is the moment where we turn into 24/7 ops. We're going to be better than we have ever been in these moments. And we must be, because I believe this message, and I shared this with, I used to share this with the future combat leaders that I would train at the Officer Candidate School. You're all, I would say this, you're all equal in stature right now. You're equal in comprehension. You're equal in capabilities. You're all, trained soldiers. You're most of your NCOs, grizzled, experienced. You've done this before. You're ready to fight. You're ready to lead into the firefight. But here's the thing. When we structure you as a platoon, as a company, as a squad, whatever, you're going to have a leader. And if that leader fails, if your leader falls down and says, I don't know which way to go, and you're stuck on the X, you're stuck in the fight, you're stuck in the mess, and nobody's leading your way out of it, I guarantee you the entire organization will fail. Your leaders must, at a time like this, point the way out, point the way through the fight. And so I believe that at this time, we're all capable, we're all competent, but I'm going to lead us out of this fight. And the same is true in Ocean City and Easton and Wacomico County and Sussex County. Our leaders must step up at a time like this.
You're good at managing hard and soft. What do you say to people who are really afraid? How do you tap that soft side and console with them?
Greg, the thing that gets lost in some of the antiseptic conversations about bailout packages and grants versus loans and liquidity and continuity of operations is this. People are getting laid off. Unemployment insurance hasn't kicked in yet. People are going to hurt. I saw a message yesterday from a person who was saying their leasing agent for their apartment complex sent out a message just saying, no breaks. Nobody's getting any breaks. Sure, you're not getting evicted, but you're going to rack up that debt. And how people are going to come out of that, well, after having lost their job, after having lost income, I don't know. So this is the time that we turn to those with more resources than I possibly could muster at a municipal level or that our county could muster at a county level. And we say, you must help. Our congressmen, our senators, our president, you must help. I do not understand. I cannot understand why anyone would fall into a trap of partisan politics at a time like this. It's shameful, it's embarrassing, and we deserve better than that. Because that person that's out there that's having hard decisions about what bills to pay, which ones to set aside, who's going to be generous with me, who's not, that person is going to suffer if they're not already. What gives me a lot of hope is watching our school board, Dr. Hanlon and the team at the Board of Education, watching our churches, civic organizations, the philanthropic sector. I was blown away by a phone call the other day by all of the charities in our area, all of the foundations and trusts in our area got together on a phone call with the Greater Salisbury Committee with Mike Dunn, and they talked about what they're going to do, how they're going to unlock resources. Those conversations are the very things that we must lean on right now. Those folks. Pastor Martin Hutchison out there feeding on the steps of the Newton Community Center, which the construction crew, God bless them, is still working. The folks like that are putting lunches and breakfasts and dinners in the hands of hungry kids are amazing right now. I'll tell you what personally worries me more than anything, and I am praying for our social workers right now. DSS, what the job that they have right now, when kids are trapped in an environment, or adults are trapped in an environment of domestic violence or neglect, and some of that neglect obviously is criminal and is a choice being made by adults, and some of it is because we're entering a period where access to resources is limited. But all of it must be protected against. And so I pray for our social workers out there. DSS has a heck of a job, and I think that's what concerns me most. That's what's keeping me up at night. I'm watching us get resources to our homeless population. I'm watching us get resources to kids where we can. But I'm worried about some of the more vulnerable in our community.
Yeah, it's hard to compartmentalize because I know, in terms of what I do in my work, it's more than just the coronavirus coverage. There's other things I need to focus on, and I find myself struggling to deal with that. You're still running a city. You're right in the middle of a budget time. You've got a capital budget going on. You've got a city budget going on. That stuff doesn't change. So how are you able to shift gears from these different things? How can you keep people motivated on these things?
You're right. The budget is ongoing right now.
Yeah.
So we're doing Zoom calls for budget right now. The City Council held a legislative session last night, broadcast live on pac14.org and YouTube /pac14. That conversation bridged from appointments to boards and commissions, which aren't meeting right now,
right.
By the way. We're trying to get our board and commission members trained up to use Zoom and freeconferencecall.com and tools like that. The budget surplus or surplus of vehicles. There was a CIP amendment to or a capital projects amendment to do a bathroom at the water plant. I mean, things that have nothing to do with the coronavirus.
Right.
Because the show must go on. business cannot entirely screech to a halt. The business of the people, business of government.
But I have trouble shifting gears from the one thing to the other. I mean, how do you lead people through that?
Well, so from a management standpoint, here's what I've done. The executive order that I issued yesterday, which addressed our state of emergency and addressed some of the appointments that we have, I included some management appointments in there. And these are things that could have been done through an email, but I thought it important to record in a mayor's order because I felt like that document will live on as a part of the portfolio of things that say, here's what happened then, and here's what we can do to improve moving forward. And I wanted to make that public and not have that private. So what that did was it appointed the city administrator, Julia Glanz, as the COVID-19 czar for the city, and took the rest of her portfolio and said it is subordinate to that issue. So you must lead with that, and then the deputy city administrator will take over whatever duties you delegate to him. Now, she doesn't need to spend 24/7 on COVID-19. She's got other things she's got to address, but it created a dynamic where she knows the order is this is priority one and everything else comes second. So utilize your resources. Utilize those people who you lean on and trust to deal with other things all day long for you, and lean on them for those things which you might have reserved to yourself previously. And there's plenty of things that I'm reserving as mayor's decision and mayor's level responsibility, but there's plenty of things that I delegate on a daily basis to Ms. Glanz. The same is true for our public information officer. Said COVID-19 communication is your chief responsibility. Everything else can be delegated to our communications associate. The same is true with our finance director and our deputy finances director. Your priority one is ensure you're tracking every financial impact. So that's in expense and revenue projections that are going to be impacted by this, because believe me, we're all going to take a hit. So ensuring that they understand those prioritizations is step one. Because once you know what's priority one, what's priority two, what's priority three, you can begin to act. So I know in my mind, priority one is I got to communicate with the public. I got to say, here's what's happening. I got to lead my team through this crisis. I got to do other stuff too. But so I know here's how we're going to fit things in. This, communication and leadership is going to get scheduled first. Management is going to get scheduled first. Then, second, we're going to deal with, whatever's next. I've not seen a slowdown at all in the work that has gone on in terms of the 100% property inspection over at Salisbury Police Department right now. Field operations continues to work their tails off all over the city. Housing and community development continues to do planning for the Youth Civics Council and the Youth Summer Jobs Program. Hopefully we can implement all those things. Maybe we can actually implement summer jobs early. Honestly, there's so much that this crisis changes, but the work must go on. So it is tough, you're right, to compartmentalize, and there's so many other things we must do.
There was a question about hardship pay, and I've been worried about that because I hear the state employees unions are going to push this hardship pay issue, and you said something to the effect of, it would cost us $300,000 a week. It's just not doable. It would bankrupt us. And that was sort of the end of that. So I felt better about that. Like that it wasn't dismissive so much, but it's just like right now we can't really maybe focus on that. I don't want to beat on that too much. And then the other interesting thing was someone in Fruitland said people are flushing wipes down the toilet and it's backing up. And you could just sort of see all the managers. You could just hear like in their just you could just sort of sense they were all going, oh my gosh, that's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And we hear all the time about the weird stuff that ends up in the sewer that causes problems.
This is a topic that's important, Greg, which is that that we must recognize that our habits change, our household habits change, but it has effects on public infrastructure and on public resources. And that's a metaphor for this entire crisis. We must change our habits or else we're going to affect the public. So we've got to be cognizant that everything we do is going to affect people. But these things that you might not think about are changing. Please don't flush wipes down the toilet because they will damage our sewer systems.
Someone's got to crawl in somewhere and take these things out.
Yeah. there are pictures of people in Salisbury doing that.
And people wanted me to write about this, and I'm like, no, we're not gonna
certainly
do
not
that.
going to put a picture
Right.
in the
Right.
newspaper. And then you're right about hazard pay, which is something that we're looking at. We're still trying to find ways to acknowledge that there are people putting themselves at a new risk. These are people that put themselves at risk every day, but it's a new risk, a new level of risk requiring new protections. And while there is an inherent level of risk to those jobs, we want to recognize that. But what we learned was the state immediately when this thing kicked off, kicked in double pay, hazard pay for state police, corrections, and it was just ended by executive order of the governor. There is no hazard pay for state employees anymore. So I don't suspect that they're going to be successful trying to convince him otherwise. Now, we're still trying to figure out what to do. There are other institutions trying to figure out what to do. Wycomico County has had some time and a half for certain employees. So we want to recognize our people, of course, but we have to be very, very cautious of that, or else we will bankrupt the city of Salisbury, and I can't allow that to happen.
Where do you see this going, and what message do you have, what final message do you have for the people out there as we deal with a crisis?
Yesterday, after all of our calls of local government and state officials, I watched the White House press conference, and in which the president said that he does not see these restrictions to daily life lasting 3 to 4 months, as others have said. I don't know who he was referring to there, but probably governors that he doesn't like. And then he said, we'll look at this thing at the end of the 15-day period, which is only, I think, like 7 days away.
And there were a lot of people who jumped to the defense of that, but I'm not, based on what I'm reading and seeing, I can't support that notion unless I'm completely off wrong.
You're not. I think you're 100% right. Here's what I know. Trust your experts. In my organization, if there's any reason I make a decision counter to what our subject matter expert advises, I'm going to explain it. We're going to talk through it. We're going to look at all the consequences. Otherwise, chances are I'm just going to trust the subject matter expert. Our public health experts are saying that's ludicrous. They're saying absolutely not. We can't do that. And if you saw the face of the public health expert over the president's left shoulder, and the sigh that came out of her when that was spoken, she may not be at the next press conference, but that can't happen. We're not going to be out of this in a week. We're not going to be back to normal in a week. More businesses are going to have to shut down. More people are going to be hurt. More people are going to have to suffer and in order to keep people alive. And the governor has clearly made the prioritization of public health over economic health. The president said he doesn't want the cure to be worse than the illness. I think that's always smart to weigh those things. I agree with the president on that assessment. We don't want the cure to be worse than the illness. In this case, I think the cure will be worse economically than the challenge we might have if we had let it just happen. But the public health costs are unreal. And you and I know that somebody's got to look in the eyes of some loved one, of some person, and say, we let your family member die so that the economy would be more robust, so that we would have, another bump in the Dow Industrial Average. I mean, come on, you can't do that. We can't do that. You got to be better than that as leaders. You got to make hard decisions. And so I think this is a time when we're going to have to all come together, recognize this is going to be tough, lean on each other, and whatever you've got. If you have a spare hour, a spare penny, a spare moment to say a prayer, do something for someone who is less fortunate in our area than you are. I beg you. So this is the moment to step up and help your neighbor. We're going to have to rely on more than government to survive this thing. So lean on one another. And so far, by all indications, I think in Salisbury and across Delmarva, that's exactly what we're seeing.
He's Mayor Jake Day, and we're thrilled that he had some time to be with us today to talk about what's going on in Salisbury. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of One-on-One right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.